"Mom, don't say his name. Not tonight. Not before you see what I found." Those words came out of my daughter's mouth at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in April, and I knew right then that nothing would ever be the same. Not in my house. Not in my heart. Not in the life I thought I had built so carefully after all those years alone. My name is Barbara Klein. I am 77 years old, and I have lived in Eugene, Oregon for most of my adult life. I raised 2 daughters in this town, buried 1 husband, remarried another. I thought I knew what safety looked like. I thought I had finally gotten it right the second time around. I thought the hard part was over. I was wrong about everything. It was 3:08 in the morning when Rachel came into my bedroom. She didn't knock. She never does that. My daughter has always been respectful of boundaries, careful not to intrude, the kind of young woman who texts before calling and waits to be invited in. But that night she opened my door like she owned not just the room, but the entire truth of what was about to happen next. I woke to the sound of my own breathing before I even understood why. Something in my body knew before my brain caught up. The air felt different, heavier, like the molecules themselves were holding information I wasn't ready to process. Rachel stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, backlit by the hallway light I always leave on because I am old and I fall easily in the dark. Her face was perfectly still, not frightened, not angry, just decided. That's the only word I can use. She looked like someone who had already made a choice and was simply waiting for me to catch up. Before I could ask what was wrong, before I could reach for my glasses or sit up or do any of the motherly things you do when your child appears in the middle of the night, she walked straight to my bed and took my wrist. Not hard, but firm. The kind of grip that says, "Don't move yet." And then she said it. "Before I show you, I need you to answer me without thinking. When this is over, are you going to protect him, or are you finally going to believe me?" Not a question. A test. I want to stop here for just a second. I need to catch my breath even now, months later, because that sentence still sits in my chest like a stone I can't cough up. If you're still with me, if you're listening to an old woman try to make sense of the worst night of her life, would you do me a kindness? Tell me in the comments where you are right now. What city? What state? What country if you're far from here? And tell me what time it is where you are. Is it late? Is it early? Are you alone? I want to know I'm not the only one awake with these kinds of memories. If this story is already making you feel something, hit that like button. And if you want to hear how it ends, subscribe. There's a new story here every single day. Someone out there needs to hear what I'm about to say. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's someone you love. Now let me keep going. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what happened. Not just my name. Who I really am underneath all the decisions that led me to that moment. I was born in Corvallis, Oregon, in 1947. My father worked at the lumber mill. My mother kept house and raised 4 children on a budget so tight you could hear it creak. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And back then, that felt like enough. I learned early that safety wasn't about money. It was about knowing your place, staying quiet, not making waves, not asking for things you couldn't have. I married young, 20 years old, a boy from church named Daniel Klein who had kind eyes and a steady job at the post office. We had 2 daughters. Rachel came first in 1996, then Sarah 2 years later in 1998. Those girls were my entire world. I poured everything I had into making sure they felt loved and safe and seen. Daniel died in 2009. Heart attack. No warning. One day he was sorting mail and making plans to retire early, and the next day he was gone. I was 62 years old and suddenly alone with a mortgage and 2 daughters still finding their way in the world. Sarah had just started college. Rachel was working part-time and living at home. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone. I had made peace with that. And then I met Michael. Michael Klein. No relation to Daniel, just a coincidence of names that felt like fate at the time. I met him at a community center event in 2011. He was recently widowed himself. We bonded over loss, over starting over over the strange loneliness of being older and invisible in a world that only sees youth. He was kind to me, attentive. He listened when I talked about Daniel. He brought me flowers. He fixed things around my house without being asked. He made me feel like maybe I wasn't done living after all. We married in 2012. Small ceremony, just family. Rachel was there. Sarah flew in from Seattle where she had moved for work. Everyone said how happy they were for me, how I deserved this, how Michael seemed like such a good man. He moved into my house on Willamette Heights Lane, the house Daniel and I had bought in 1983, the house where I raised my girls, the house that had always been mine. I didn't think twice about it. Michael folded into our lives so smoothly. He got along with Rachel. He was polite and helpful and never overstepped. He had his own money from his late wife's life insurance, so there was no financial strain. Everything seemed balanced, healthy, right. For years it was. But sometime around 2022, things started to shift. Small things. Things I told myself didn't mean anything. Rachel, who had always been open and chatty with me, started closing herself off. She moved back home in 2021 after a breakup and was supposed to stay temporarily while she saved money. But months turned into a year, then 2. And instead of the easy companionship we used to have, there was distance. She stopped joining us for dinner. She started spending more time in her room. She bought a lock for her door, a heavy one, the kind you install when you don't trust what's on the other side. I asked her about it once, just casually. "Honey, why do you need a lock? We're all family here." She looked at me for a long time before answering, and then she said, "Because I sleep better when I know no one can get in." I didn't push. I told myself she was still processing her breakup, still adjusting, still finding her footing. I told myself a lot of things because the alternative was unthinkable. There were other signs. She stopped making eye contact with Michael. If he walked into a room, she found a reason to leave. If he offered to help her with something, she declined. Always politely, always with an excuse. But the pattern was there. I noticed she stopped wearing certain clothes around the house. No more shorts, no more tank tops, always long sleeves, always covered, even in summer. I noticed she jumped when doors opened unexpectedly. I noticed she started keeping her phone with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. I noticed she flinched when Michael reached past her to grab something from a shelf, and every time I noticed, I explained it away. She's going through something. She's stressed, she's private, she's always been sensitive. Michael noticed too. He would say things like, "Rachel seems tense lately. Is she okay?" And I would defend her. Say she's fine. Say she just needs space. Say she's working through things. He was so good at seeming concerned. That's what I keep coming back to. How good he was at it. Our house is a small ranch-style home with 3 bedrooms. Mine and Michael's room at one end of the hall. Rachel's room at the other. The bathroom and Michael's office in between. His office used to be Sarah's room, but after she moved out permanently, Michael converted it. He worked from home part-time doing consulting work for an engineering firm. He spent hours in there, door closed, music playing softly. I never questioned it. A man deserves his own space. That's what I thought. The office had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on one wall, a large oak desk that used to belong to his late father, a filing cabinet, a lamp, everything neat and organized. Michael was meticulous about his space. Everything had a place, everything had a reason, including the bottom drawer of his desk. I had never seen it open, not once in 12 years. He said he kept old tax documents in there, financial papers, boring stuff. He kept it locked because, he said, identity theft was a real concern these days. Made sense to me. I didn't ask questions. Rachel apparently did. That night, when she woke me at 3:08 in the morning, when she gripped my wrist and asked me to choose between believing him or believing her, she didn't wait for my answer. She pulled me out of bed, led me down the hallway, past the bathroom, past Michael's closed office door where I could hear him snoring lightly on the other side. She stopped in front of that door, put her finger to her lips, turned the handle slowly, so slowly, pushed it open without a sound. The hallway light spilled into the dark office just enough for me to see her kneel in front of the desk. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a key. Small, silver, ordinary looking. I whispered, "Where did you get that?" She didn't answer, just slid the key into the lock on the bottom drawer, turned it, and pulled. The drawer opened, and everything I thought I knew stopped making sense. Inside that drawer was a life I had never seen. Organized, deliberate, continuous. There were file folders, labeled, dated, arranged chronologically. There were printed photographs, not random, not accidental, intentional. There were handwritten notes, lists, schedules, observations. There were USB drives, 3 of them, lined up neatly in a small plastic case. Rachel pulled out one of the folders, opened it, showed me. Inside were photographs of her. Not family photos, not birthday snapshots, pictures taken without her knowledge. In the house, in her room, through windows, through cracked doors. Images from angles that made my stomach turn because I knew where the camera had to have been to capture them. There were dates written on the back of each photo. Some from 6 months ago, some from 2 years ago, some from even earlier. I looked at my daughter. Her face was completely expressionless, like she had already cried every tear her body could produce, and there was nothing left but factual presentation. She pulled out another folder, showed me printed messages, screenshots of conversations I didn't recognize, text exchanges that didn't make sense until I realized they were between Michael and someone else. Someone talking about Rachel like she was an object, a project, a possession. She pulled out a small notebook, opened it, showed me handwritten entries in Michael's handwriting, observations about her schedule, what time she showered, what time she went to bed, what she wore, what she ate. Details no stepfather should ever notice, let alone document. And then she pulled out one of the USB drives, held it up, said quietly, "This one has video." I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on the floor. My heart was pounding so loud I thought Michael would hear it through the wall and wake up. Rachel knelt beside me, put her hand on my shoulder, and said the thing I will never forget as long as I live. "Mom, I tried to tell you. 2 years ago. You said I was imagining things. You said Michael would never. You said I was being paranoid because of what happened with Jason. You chose him. So I stopped trying. I learned to survive instead. I copied his key. I documented everything. I waited. I waited until I had proof you couldn't explain away. So now I need you to answer the question I asked you upstairs. Are you going to protect him? Or are you finally going to believe me?" I looked at my daughter. My 28-year-old daughter who had been living in terror in my house while I slept peacefully down the hall. My daughter who had tried to tell me and I had dismissed her. My daughter who had been so alone that she had to become her own investigator, her own protector, her own last line of defense. And I said the only thing I could say, "I believe you." She nodded, just once, and then she closed the drawer, locked it, stood up, and said, "Good, because we leave in 4 hours. Pack light. Don't wake him. Don't leave a note. Don't try to talk to him. We leave and we never come back." I wanted to ask 100 questions. Where are we going? What about the house? What about my things? What about confronting him? What about the police? But Rachel's face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't the beginning of a fight. This was an escape. I stood up on shaking legs, followed her back down the hall, back to my room. She stood in the doorway while I pulled a suitcase from the closet, while I packed clothes with trembling hands, while I tried to figure out how my entire life had become unrecognizable in the span of 20 minutes. Michael never woke up. At 6:45 in the morning, Rachel and I walked out the front door with 2 suitcases and my purse and nothing else. We got into her car. She started the engine, pulled out of the driveway, and drove. I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't look back at the house. I sat in the passenger seat with my hands folded in my lap and watched Eugene disappear in the rearview mirror. And I thought about every moment I had missed. Every time Rachel had tried to tell me something, and I hadn't listened. Every time she had changed the subject when Michael entered the room, and I had thought nothing of it. Every time she had locked her door, and I had called it privacy instead of protection. I had failed her. Not because I didn't love her, because I loved the wrong person more. That realization sat in my chest like a knife I couldn't pull out. Rachel drove us to a motel 2 hours outside Eugene, a small place off the highway. She paid cash, didn't use her credit card, didn't give our real names. She had planned this. She had thought through every detail. We sat in that motel room with its faded floral bedspread and its flickering television and its thin walls, and Rachel finally let herself cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears running down her face while she stared at the wall. I held her. I didn't say anything because words felt useless. What could I possibly say that would make up for 2 years of not believing her? 2 years of letting her live in danger because I couldn't see past my own need to believe I had finally gotten love right. After a long time, she pulled away, wiped her face, and said, "We need to decide what happens next." I said, "We go to the police." She shook her head. "Not yet. Not until we have a plan. Not until we know he can't find us. Not until we're safe." I wanted to argue, wanted to say we had evidence, we had proof, we could end this now. But Rachel had lived this. I hadn't, so I trusted her. We stayed in that motel for 3 days. Rachel contacted a lawyer, a woman she had found online who specialized in cases like this. Cases involving digital evidence, cases involving family members, cases that required safety planning before legal action. The lawyer's name was Jennifer Ortiz. She met us at a coffee shop in a town I'd never been to before. She listened to everything Rachel had to say, looked at the copies Rachel had made of the drawer's contents, and told us the truth. "This is prosecutable. But it's going to be hard. He's going to deny everything. He's going to say the photos were accidental, the notes were misunderstood, the messages were taken out of context. He's going to make you look unstable. He's going to use your age, Barbara, to suggest you're confused. He's going to use Rachel's past relationship to suggest she has trust issues. This is going to get ugly." Rachel didn't flinch. She just said, "I don't care. I want him exposed." Jennifer nodded. "Then we do this right. We build the case. We involve law enforcement. We get a restraining order. We make sure he can't hurt you or anyone else. But you have to be prepared. This is going to take time, and it's going to cost you both emotionally." I looked at Rachel, my brave, exhausted, traumatized daughter who had been fighting alone for so long, and I said, "Whatever it takes." That was the moment everything changed, not when I saw the drawer, not when I left the house, but when I made the choice to fight. I need to tell you how I got here. Not just to this motel room with its coffee maker that doesn't work, and its shower that drips all night, but how I became the kind of mother who didn't see what was happening to her own child under her own roof. I was born Barbara Jean Whitmore in Corvallis, Oregon in 1947. My father, Robert Whitmore, worked at the Georgia Pacific Lumber Mill for 38 years. My mother, Diane, raised 4 children and kept a house so clean you could eat off the floors. We didn't have money. We had rules. We had order. We had a place in the world, and we stayed in it. My father was not a cruel man, but he was a hard man. He believed children should be seen and not heard. He believed women had a role and men had a role, and you didn't cross those lines. He believed the worst thing you could be was a burden or a complainer or someone who made other people uncomfortable with your problems. I learned early to keep my mouth shut, to smile when things hurt, to pretend everything was fine even when it wasn't. That skill served me well for most of my life, until it didn't. I met Daniel Klein at a church picnic in 1966. I was 19 years old. He was 22. He worked at the post office, and he had the kindest smile I had ever seen. We courted for a year, got married in 1967. I wore my mother's wedding dress and carried daisies because roses were too expensive. We had a good marriage, not perfect, but good. Daniel worked hard, came home every night, helped with the girls when they were little. Never raised his hand to me, never raised his voice. He wasn't romantic or expressive, but he was steady. And after growing up with my father's unpredictability, steady felt like love. Rachel was born in 1996. I was 49 years old. Doctors said it was a miracle. I had thought my childbearing years were over. But there she was, 7 pounds 3 ounces, a head full of dark hair and eyes that seemed to see right through me. From the moment she was born, Rachel was different, not difficult, just intense. She felt everything deeply. When she was happy, she glowed. When she was sad, she couldn't hide it. She had no mask, no ability to pretend. I used to worry about that. I used to think the world would hurt her because she couldn't protect herself the way I had learned to. I was right, but not in the way I thought. Sarah came 2 years later. Easier baby, easier child. She floated through life with a confidence Rachel never had. Sarah made friends effortlessly, got good grades without trying, left for college at 18 and never looked back. She lives in Seattle now, works in tech, married to a man I've met twice. We talk on the phone once a month. She loves me, but from a distance. Rachel stayed close, maybe too close. After her breakup with Jason in 2021, she moved back home. She said it was temporary, just until she saved enough money to get her own place again. I was glad. I had missed her. The house had felt too empty with just me and Michael. I didn't see what I was bringing her into. Daniel died in 2009. Massive heart attack at work. No warning. No chance to say goodbye. One of his co-workers found him collapsed in the break room. He was 64 years old. We had been married 42 years. I don't think I really grieved him properly. I went through the motions, planned the funeral, accepted casseroles from church ladies, smiled and thanked people for coming. But inside I just felt numb, like someone had turned off a switch and I was waiting for it to turn back on. It never did. By 2011, I had been alone for 2 years. I was 64 years old, retired from my job as a school secretary, living on Daniel's pension and Social Security. The house was paid off, but everything else felt uncertain. I didn't know how to be alone. I had gone from my father's house to my husband's house without ever learning how to just be Barbara. That's when I met Michael. He was at a grief support group at the community center. His wife had died of cancer the year before. He talked about how hard it was to sleep in an empty bed, how hard it was to cook for one, how hard it was to have all this life left and no one to share it with. I understood every word. We started meeting for coffee after the group sessions, then lunch, then dinner. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. He made me laugh. He made me feel young. He made me feel like maybe the second half of my life didn't have to be about waiting to die. He proposed on a beach in Cannon Beach, down on one knee, a small diamond ring. I said yes before he even finished asking. We married in June of 2012. Small ceremony at a little chapel in Eugene. Rachel was there. She wore a blue dress and smiled in all the photos. Sarah flew in and gave a toast about how happy she was that I had found love again. Everyone said Michael was wonderful, patient, kind, exactly what I needed. And for a long time, I believed them. Michael moved into my house. It made sense. He had been renting an apartment. I owned my home outright. He brought his furniture, his books, his clothes. We merged our lives like it was the most natural thing in the world. He got along with Rachel. At first, he would ask her about her day, offer to help her with things around the house, fix her car when it made a strange noise. He was involved, interested, fatherly. I thought that was good. Rachel's relationship with her biological father had been fine, but not close. Daniel loved her, but he didn't know how to talk to her. Michael seemed different, more present, more engaged. I didn't see it for what it was. Looking back now, I can see the pattern. The way he always found reasons to be wherever Rachel was. The way he offered to drive her places. The way he commented on her appearance. Not in a gross way, not overtly, just little things. You look nice today. That color suits you. Did you do something different with your hair? I thought he was being kind. Rachel started pulling away sometime in 2022. Subtly at first. She stopped joining us for movie nights, stopped sitting in the living room, started eating dinner in her room. I asked her if everything was okay. She said she was fine, just tired, just busy with work. I believed her because it was easier than not believing her. Then came the lock on her door. I remember the day she installed it. I came home from grocery shopping and heard drilling. I knocked on her door. She opened it with a power drill in her hand and a new deadbolt already halfway installed. I said, "Honey, what are you doing?" She said, "I need more privacy." I said, "From who?" "It's just me and Michael." She didn't answer. Just went back to drilling. I told Michael about it that night. He frowned, said, "That's odd. Do you think she's okay?" I said, "I don't know. Maybe she's going through something." He said, "Maybe we should give her space. Let her work it out." So we did. And Rachel got quieter, thinner, more distant. I started noticing other things. She stopped wearing shorts around the house, stopped wearing anything sleeveless, started dressing like she was trying to disappear. Baggy clothes, layers, always covered. She stopped making eye contact with Michael. If he walked into a room, she found an excuse to leave. If he spoke to her, she answered in one-word responses. Michael noticed too. He would say things like, "I think Rachel doesn't like me very much." I would defend her, say she's just going through a phase, say she's dealing with her breakup, say it's not personal, and he would nod, say he understood, say he just wanted her to feel comfortable. He was so good at seeming hurt, at seeming like the victim of her inexplicable coldness. I feel sick just thinking about it now. There was one conversation that haunts me. One moment where Rachel tried to tell me and I shut her down completely. It was about 6 months before that night in April. We were in the kitchen, just the two of us. Michael was at the store. Rachel was washing dishes. I was putting away groceries. And out of nowhere she said, "Mom, do you ever feel like something's wrong but you can't prove it?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Like you know something's happening, but no one else sees it. And if you say it out loud, you'll sound crazy." I stopped what I was doing, looked at her, said, "Is this about Jason? Are you still processing the breakup?" She didn't answer right away, just kept washing the same plate over and over. Then she said, "What if it's not about Jason?" I said, "Then what's it about?" She looked at me, really looked at me. And for a second I thought she was going to say it, whatever it was, whatever she had been holding. But then she looked away, shook her head, said, "Never mind. Forget I said anything." I said, "Rachel, if something's wrong, you can tell me." She laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was bitter, sad. She said, "Can I?" I said, "Of course. I'm your mother." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "What if I told you I don't feel safe here?" My stomach dropped. I said, "What do you mean? Did something happen?" She said, "Would you believe me if I told you?" I said, "Believe you about what?" And she just shook her head, said, "That's what I thought." I said, "Rachel, you're not making sense. If someone hurt you, if someone did something, you need to tell me." She said, "I tried. A year ago. You said I was imagining things." I froze. Because I remembered. I remembered her saying something about Michael making her uncomfortable. And I had said she was overreacting. I had said Michael was just trying to be helpful. I had said she was projecting her issues with Jason onto an innocent man. I had shut her down, and she had never brought it up again. Standing there in the kitchen, I had a choice. I could ask her to explain. I could push. I could demand to know what she meant. But I didn't. I said, "Honey, I think you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist, someone who can help you process everything you've been through." She stared at me, and I watched something die in her eyes. She said, "You're right. I should talk to someone." And then she walked out of the kitchen. We never spoke about it again. That conversation plays in my head on a loop now, because if I had listened, if I had believed her, if I had just asked one more question, maybe she wouldn't have had to break into Michael's desk. Maybe she wouldn't have had to live in fear for 2 more years. Maybe she wouldn't have had to save herself because her own mother wouldn't. But I didn't listen, and she paid the price. I need to stop for a second. My hands are shaking just remembering that moment. Knowing I had a chance and I blew it. Knowing my daughter was screaming for help in the only way she knew how, and I turned away. If you're still with me, if you're still listening, I need to ask you something. Where are you right now? What city? What state? Drop it in the comments, because I need to know I'm not alone with this. And what time is it where you are? Are you up late? Are you listening because you can't sleep? I understand that more than you know. If this story is hitting you somewhere deep, leave a like. Let me know you're here. And subscribe if you haven't already. There's a new story every single day here. Maybe tomorrow's will be the one someone you love needs to hear. Maybe it will be yours. Now let me keep going, because what comes next is the hardest part. After we left Eugene, after those 3 days in the motel, after meeting with Jennifer Ortiz, things started moving fast. Jennifer filed for a restraining order on Rachel's behalf. Temporary at first, then permanent. The order prohibited Michael from contacting Rachel in any way, from coming within 500 feet of her, from entering any residence where she was staying. We had to go back to Eugene for the hearing. I was terrified. Terrified of seeing him, terrified of what he would say, terrified that somehow he would convince everyone we were wrong. But Rachel was calm. She had printed every photo, every note, every message. She had organized it all into a binder with tabs and dates and context. She had written a statement, 10 pages long, detailing everything. The hearing was in a small courtroom. Michael showed up with a lawyer, expensive suit, slicked back hair. He looked at me across the room, and his face was a mask of hurt confusion. He mouthed, "Barbara, what's going on?" I looked away. Rachel presented her evidence. The judge reviewed it, asked questions. Michael's lawyer tried to argue that the photos were innocent, that the notes were misunderstood, that Rachel was mentally unstable and making accusations to hurt her stepfather. But the evidence was too specific, too organized, too continuous. The judge granted the restraining order. Michael's face went blank. Not angry, not sad, just blank. That scared me more than anything. We left the courthouse and drove straight back to the motel. Jennifer said we needed to stay out of Eugene until the criminal investigation was complete. She had already contacted the police, filed a report, handed over copies of everything Rachel had found. Detective Maria Santos was assigned to the case. She was in her mid-40s, serious, thorough. She interviewed Rachel for hours, went through every piece of evidence, asked hard questions, questions that made Rachel cry, but she believed her. That was the first time I saw Rachel relax, even a little, because someone in authority finally believed her. Detective Santos explained the process. They would execute a search warrant on Michael's office, seize his computer, his phone, all the physical evidence. They would analyze everything, build a case, present it to the district attorney. It would take time, weeks, maybe months. Rachel nodded, said she understood. I asked, "What do we do in the meantime?" Detective Santos said, "You stay safe, you stay away from him, and you prepare yourselves for a fight, because men like this don't go down easy." She was right. 3 days after the hearing, Michael's lawyer sent a letter. It accused Rachel of fabricating evidence, of breaking and entering, of theft. It threatened a defamation lawsuit. It threatened to seek damages for emotional distress. Jennifer read it and laughed. She said, "This is a scare tactic. Ignore it." But it worked. I was scared. Rachel wasn't. She said, "Let him try. Let him explain in court why he had those photos. Let him explain the notes. Let him explain everything." Her strength terrified me, because I knew where it came from. It came from being betrayed so deeply that there was nothing left to lose. 2 weeks later, the search warrant was executed. Police went to my house, the house I had lived in for 40 years, and they took Michael's computer, his desk, his files, his phone. They found more. Detective Santos called us, said they had found additional USB drives hidden in the garage, more folders, more documentation, some of it going back years, before Rachel even moved back home, back to when she was visiting during college. I thought I was going to be sick. Rachel just closed her eyes, said, "I knew it. I knew it wasn't just recent." The DA decided to press charges, multiple counts, invasion of privacy, stalking, possession of unlawful recordings, each one a felony. Michael pleaded not guilty. His lawyer painted him as a grieving widower who had remarried a lonely woman and been welcomed into a family. He said Rachel had mental health issues, that she had accused her previous boyfriend of similar things, that this was a pattern of behavior, that she was trying to destroy an innocent man because she couldn't handle her mother having a new husband. It was all lies. But it worked on some people. Sarah called me, my own daughter. She said, "Mom, are you sure about this? Michael has always been so good to you. Are you sure Rachel isn't overreacting?" I said, "I've seen the evidence." She said, "Evidence can be misinterpreted." I said, "Not like this." She sighed, said, "I just don't want you to ruin your life over something that might not be what it seems." I hung up on her. I haven't spoken to her since. The trial was set for October, 4 months away. We stayed in a small rental house Jennifer helped us find. 2 bedrooms, quiet neighborhood. Far enough from Eugene that I didn't see anyone I knew. Rachel started therapy, twice a week. She said it helped. I could see it in her face. She was starting to sleep better, eat better. She even smiled sometimes. I started therapy too, because I needed to understand how I had missed it, how I had chosen him over her, how I had failed so completely. My therapist, Dr. Ellen Cho, said something that broke me. She said, "Barbara, you were conditioned your entire life to keep the peace, to not make waves, to trust authority figures. Michael was an authority figure in your home, your husband. Questioning him would have meant questioning your own judgment, your own choices, your own worth. So you didn't. You're not a bad mother. You're a woman who was taught to survive by staying small, and that survival mechanism nearly cost you your daughter." I cried for an hour after that session, because she was right, and because I didn't know how to forgive myself. The trial came in October. We sat in that courtroom every single day for 2 weeks. Listened to Michael's lawyer try to destroy Rachel's credibility. Listened to expert witnesses explain the evidence. Listened to Detective Santos testify about what they had found. And then Rachel testified. She sat on that stand for 3 hours, answered every question, stayed calm, stayed clear, told the truth. Michael's lawyer tried to rattle her, asked about her relationship with Jason, asked about her mental health, asked if she had ever lied to her mother before. Rachel looked him in the eye and said, "The only person who lied in that house was your client." The jury deliberated for 6 hours, came back with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Michael's face didn't change. He just stared straight ahead. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison. Rachel didn't react, just stood up, walked out of the courtroom, got in the car, and cried for the first time since the trial started. Not because it was over, because she had finally been believed. That night, sitting in our rental house, Rachel looked at me and said, "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for not believing me the first time." I said, "I don't know if I can either." She nodded, said, "But I'm glad you believed me when it mattered. It wasn't absolution, but it was a start. I thought the trial would be the end. I thought once the verdict came down, once Michael was sentenced, once he was taken away in handcuffs, that everything would just settle into some kind of normal, that Rachel and I would hug and cry and start rebuilding our relationship and our lives. I was wrong. The trial was just the beginning of understanding how deep the damage went. 3 days after sentencing, Rachel and I were still in the rental house. We had talked about going back to Eugene, back to my house, but neither of us could bring ourselves to do it. That house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a crime scene, a place where terrible things had happened while I slept peacefully down the hall. Rachel was quieter than usual, not the tense, frightened quiet from before. This was different, heavier, like she was carrying something she hadn't yet figured out how to put down. We were sitting at the small kitchen table, morning light coming through the window, coffee getting cold in our mugs, and Rachel said something that made my blood run cold. "Mom, there's something I didn't tell the court, something I didn't tell the police, something I haven't even told my therapist yet." I set my coffee down, said, "What is it?" She looked at me with eyes that seemed decades older than 28, and she said, "It didn't start when I moved back home in 2021. It started way before that." I just didn't have words for it then. My heart started pounding. I said, "What do you mean?" She took a breath, a long one, like she was preparing to dive underwater and didn't know when she'd surface. "Do you remember when Michael first moved in? 2012. I was 16, still in high school." I nodded. She said, "Do you remember how helpful he was? How he always offered to drive me to school, to pick me up from practice, to help me with homework?" I said, "Yes. I thought that was kind of him." Daniel had never been that involved. Rachel's jaw tightened. She said, "It wasn't kind, it was access." The word hit me like a slap. She continued, "He started small. Compliments about my hair, my clothes, asking about boys at school, asking if I had a boyfriend, asking if I was dating anyone. It felt normal at first, fatherly. But then it started feeling different, wrong. But I couldn't explain why. I wanted to interrupt, to ask questions, but I forced myself to stay quiet, to let her speak. Then he started finding reasons to be alone with me, offering to take me to the mall while you were at work, taking me to appointments, driving me places. And during those drives, he would ask questions, personal questions, about my body, about whether I had started my period, about whether I was developing. He framed it like concern, like he was trying to make sure I was healthy and okay. But the way he looked at me when he asked, I knew it wasn't concern. My stomach turned. She said, "I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid, that he was just awkward because he didn't have kids of his own and didn't know how to talk to a teenage girl. So I didn't say anything. I just started avoiding him, making excuses not to be alone with him. But you noticed. You asked me why I was being distant, why I didn't want his help. And I tried to tell you. I said he made me uncomfortable. And you said I was being rude, that he was trying to bond with me, that I should give him a chance." I remembered that conversation. I remembered being frustrated with Rachel, thinking she was being difficult, ungrateful. I had actually scolded her, told her she needed to be more appreciative of Michael's efforts. Oh, God. Rachel kept talking, her voice steady but her hands shaking. She said, "So I stopped trying to tell you. I just learned to manage it. I made sure I was never alone with him. I spent more time at friends' houses. I stayed late at school. I got a job, so I had an excuse to be gone. And when I turned 18 and left for college, I thought I was free." She paused, took another breath. "But then I would come home for holidays, for breaks, and it would start again. The comments, the looks, the way he found reasons to touch me. A hand on my shoulder, a hug that lasted too long, standing too close. And I started dreading coming home, started making excuses to stay at school, to visit friends instead. You thought I was pulling away from you, but I was pulling away from him. I felt tears running down my face. I hadn't even realized I was crying. Rachel said, "When I moved back in 2021, I had no choice. I had just broken up with Jason. I had no money, nowhere else to go. I thought maybe it would be okay. I was older now. I could set boundaries. I could protect myself." But within a week of moving in, I knew nothing had changed. He was just more careful, more strategic, and this time he had something new. Technology. She pulled out her phone, opened a folder, showed me screenshots I hadn't seen before. Text messages from Michael to her, sent late at night, deleted immediately after, but she had screenshot them before they disappeared. The messages made me want to vomit. They were manipulative, possessive, framed as care but dripping with control, asking where she was, who she was with, why she hadn't come home yet, telling her she looked tired and should get more rest, telling her she seemed stressed and he was worried about her. On the surface, they looked like concern, but Rachel showed me the timestamps. 2 a.m, 3 a.m, times when no stepfather should be texting his stepdaughter unless there was an emergency. She said, "He wanted me to know he was watching, always watching." I couldn't speak. I just stared at the messages, at the dates, at the proof of years of harassment I had been completely blind to. Rachel said, "That's when I started locking my door, when I realized it wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. It was dangerous, and I knew if I told you, you wouldn't believe me, because you hadn't believed me before. So I decided to document everything, to gather proof, to wait until I had something undeniable, because I knew that was the only way you would choose me." Her words broke me, because she was right. She had tried to tell me for years, and I had dismissed her, defended him, made her feel crazy, made her feel alone, and she had learned that the only way to survive was to become her own protector. I reached across the table, took her hands, and said the only words I could manage, "I am so sorry." She didn't pull away, but she didn't say it was okay either, because it wasn't okay. It would never be okay. We sat there for a long time. 2 women who had both been betrayed, one by a predator, one by her own blindness. I nodded. I couldn't argue, couldn't defend myself. There was no defense. She said, "I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again. I don't know if we can go back to what we had before. But I want to try. I want to believe that you choosing me now means something, that it's not too late." I said, "I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you matter more than anything, more than my pride, more than my comfort, more than my need to believe I made good choices. You are my daughter, and I failed you, and I will never forgive myself for that. But I will also never stop fighting to earn back your trust." She looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "Okay, not forgiveness, not absolution, just okay." It was more than I deserved, but I held on to it like a lifeline. Before I continue, I need to pause. I need to catch my breath. Because what I just told you, what Rachel told me that morning, it still tears me apart. If you're still here, still listening to this old woman try to make sense of the worst mistakes of her life, I need to ask you something. Have you ever missed something important, something right in front of you? Something you should have seen but didn't because seeing it would mean admitting you were wrong? Drop a comment. Tell me I'm not the only one who has failed someone I love. And if this story is making you think about your own life, about your own family, hit that like button. Let me know you're here. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There's a new story every day, and maybe one of them will help you see what I couldn't. Now let me keep going, because the hardest part is still ahead. The weeks after that conversation were strange. Rachel and I existed in this space between mother and daughter and strangers. We were living together, eating meals together, going to therapy together. But there was a distance that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there and I was just finally seeing it. Jennifer Ortiz called with news. Michael's lawyer was filing an appeal. They were claiming the evidence had been obtained illegally, that Rachel had no right to break into his desk, that everything found in that drawer should be thrown out. Rachel's face went white when Jennifer told us. She said, "Can they do that? Can they really get him out?" Jennifer said, "They can try, but it's a weak argument. You were living in the house. You had reasonable cause to believe you were in danger. And more importantly, the police found additional evidence during their legal search that corroborates everything you found. The appeal will likely fail, but it's going to take time, and it's going to be stressful." Rachel just nodded, but I could see the fear creeping back into her eyes. That night I heard her crying in her room, soft, muffled, like she was trying not to let me hear. I knocked on her door. She didn't answer. I knocked again, said, "Rachel, please let me in." After a long moment, the door opened. She stood there in pajamas, eyes red, face wet with tears. I said, "Can I come in?" She stepped aside. I sat on her bed. She sat next to me, and I did something I should have done years ago. I just held her. Didn't say anything. Didn't try to fix it. Just held my daughter while she cried. After a while she said, "I'm so tired, Mom. I'm tired of fighting, tired of being afraid, tired of wondering if he's going to find a way out, tired of feeling like I have to prove myself over and over again." I said, "I know. And I hate that you have to carry this." She said, "Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. If I should have just kept quiet, kept surviving, kept pretending." I pulled back, looked at her, said, "No, don't ever think that. What you did was the bravest thing I've ever seen. You saved yourself when no one else would. You stood up when it would have been easier to stay silent. You fought for the truth even when it cost you everything. That is worth it. You are worth it." She looked at me with those eyes that had seen too much, and she said, "I wish I had heard that 12 years ago." The words hung in the air between us, a truth we both had to live with. I said, "I can't go back and fix what I didn't do then. But I'm here now, and I will be here every day for the rest of my life. Whether you forgive me or not, whether you trust me or not, I am here." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat like that until she fell asleep. I stayed in her room that night, sat in the chair by her bed, watched her sleep, watched her face relax, watched the fear leave her features for just a few hours, and I made a promise to myself, to her, to whatever God might be listening. I would never fail her again. 2 months later, the appeal was denied. Michael would serve his full sentence, 8 years, with possibility of parole after 5. Rachel cried when she heard, but this time they were tears of relief. We decided to sell the house in Eugene. Neither of us could go back there. Jennifer helped us hire someone to pack everything. We didn't even go inside. Just signed the papers and let strangers box up a life we no longer wanted. The house sold quickly. We used the money to buy a small place in Portland, far enough from Eugene to feel safe, close enough to Rachel's job that she could rebuild her life. We started over. But starting over isn't like flipping a switch. It's slow, it's painful, it's full of setbacks. Rachel had nightmares. She would wake up screaming. Convinced Michael was in the house, I would run to her room, turn on all the lights, show her the locks, show her the alarm system, remind her that he was in prison, that he couldn't get to her. She started having panic attacks in public. If a man walked too close, if someone looked at her too long, if she saw a car that looked like Michael's, her therapist said it was PTSD, that it was normal, that healing wasn't linear. I had my own struggles, guilt that ate at me every day. Every time I looked at Rachel, I saw the 16-year-old girl who had tried to tell me something was wrong, the girl I had dismissed, the girl I had failed. Dr. Cho told me I had to forgive myself, that holding on to guilt wasn't helping Rachel, that it was actually making things harder for her because she felt responsible for my pain. But how do you forgive yourself for something unforgivable? I'm still working on that. 6 months after the trial, Rachel started dating again. A woman named Stephanie. They met at a coffee shop. Stephanie was kind, patient, respectful of Rachel's boundaries. She knew about the trial, about Michael, about everything. And she stayed, watching Rachel smile again, watching her laugh, watching her trust someone enough to let them in. It gave me hope. Not hope that everything would be magically fixed, but hope that Rachel could still have a life, a good life, a life not defined by what was done to her. We established new routines, Sunday dinners, weekly phone calls even though we lived 20 minutes apart, therapy appointments we sometimes did together. We talked about the hard things, about the years of missed signals, about my failure to protect her, about her fear that I would choose someone else over her again. I promised I wouldn't, and I've kept that promise. I haven't dated, haven't even considered it. People ask me if I'm lonely, if I want companionship, and I tell them the truth. I had companionship, and it cost me my daughter's safety. I won't risk that again. Rachel tells me I don't have to punish myself, that I'm allowed to have a life. But this isn't punishment. This is choice. I choose her. Every single day, I choose her. Sarah finally called. 8 months after the trial, she said she was sorry, that she had been wrong not to believe Rachel, that she had let her own discomfort with the situation cloud her judgment. I said, "You need to apologize to Rachel, not me." She said, "I did. She hasn't responded." I said, "Then you wait. You wait until she's ready, and if she's never ready, you accept that, because she doesn't owe you forgiveness." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You've changed, Mom." I said I had to. We talk now, once a month, stilted conversations about weather and work and nothing important. But it's something. Maybe someday it will be more. Rachel and Sarah haven't spoken. I don't push it. That's their relationship, their choice, their timeline. A year after the trial, Detective Santos called. She said Michael was up for a parole hearing, that we had the right to submit victim impact statements, to speak at the hearing if we wanted. Rachel said no immediately, said she was done giving him any more of her time, any more of her energy, any more of her life. I asked if she was sure. She said, "He took 12 years from me. He doesn't get another minute." So we didn't go. We submitted written statements. Rachel's was 2 pages. Mine was 1. Michael was denied parole. Rachel didn't react, just nodded, said, "Good." And we moved on. Because that's what healing looks like. Not dramatic moments of closure. Just the slow, steady work of choosing to live instead of just survive. Now it's been 2 years since that night Rachel woke me up and showed me the truth. 2 years since my entire world shattered and reformed into something I barely recognize. Rachel lives in her own apartment now, small studio in a nice neighborhood. She has friends, a job she likes, a girlfriend who loves her, a life that is hers. We have dinner every Sunday. She comes to my house, or I go to hers. We cook together, talk, laugh sometimes. Other times we sit in comfortable silence. Last week she said something that made me cry. She said, "I think I'm happy, Mom." Not all the time, but sometimes. And that's more than I thought I would get. I said, "You deserve all the happiness in the world." She said, "So do you." I don't know if I believe that yet, but I'm trying. The house in Portland feels like home now. I've decorated it with things that matter. Photos of Rachel at different ages, paintings she made in elementary school that I saved, a quilt my mother made before she died, things that tell the story of who we really are, not who I pretended we were. I go to therapy every week still. Dr. Cho says I'm making progress, that I'm learning to sit with discomfort instead of avoiding it, that I'm learning to trust my instincts instead of dismissing them. I've joined a support group for family members of abuse survivors, listening to other mothers and fathers and siblings talk about missing the signs, about the guilt, about the slow work of rebuilding trust. It helps to know I'm not alone, that other people have made the same mistakes, that we're all just trying to do better. I think about Michael sometimes. Wonder if he understands what he did. Wonder if he feels remorse. Wonder if he tells himself a story where he's the victim. Probably. Predators always do, but he doesn't matter anymore. He's a chapter we've closed, a scar we carry but don't let define us. What matters is Rachel, and the relationship we're slowly, carefully rebuilding. It's not the relationship we had before. That one was built on my denial and her silence. This one is built on truth, on hard conversations, on accountability. It's better this way, even though it's harder. Last month, Rachel asked me if I regretted marrying Michael, if I wished I had stayed alone after Daniel died. I thought about it for a long time before answering, because the easy answer is yes. Of course I regret it. He destroyed my family, hurt my daughter, shattered any illusion of safety. But I said, I regret not seeing who he really was. I regret not believing you. I regret every moment I chose comfort over truth. But I don't regret the lessons I learned. I don't regret becoming the person I had to become to fight for you. I don't regret finally understanding what really matters. She nodded, said, "That's a good answer." And we left it at that, because some questions don't have clean answers. Some wounds don't fully heal. Some mistakes can't be undone. All we can do is keep moving forward, keep choosing truth, keep choosing each other. That's what I'm doing now. Every single day. Choosing Rachel. The thing about trauma is that it doesn't end when the threat is gone. Michael was in prison. Rachel was safe. We had moved to a new city, started new lives, built new routines. But the damage he left behind didn't disappear with him. It lived in Rachel's nightmares, in her panic attacks, in the way she checked locks 3 times before bed, in the way she positioned herself in restaurants so she could see all the exits, in the way she flinched when someone approached her from behind. It lived in me too, in the guilt that woke me at 3 a.m, in the constant replay of every missed sign, every dismissed concern, every moment I chose him over her. In the knowledge that I had failed at the most important job I would ever have, protecting my child. 3 years after the trial, Rachel's therapist suggested she might benefit from group therapy, a support group specifically for survivors of familial abuse. Rachel was hesitant at first. She said she didn't want to sit in a circle and share her story with strangers, didn't want to hear other people's horror stories, didn't want to be defined by what happened to her. But her therapist, Dr. Morgan, said something that changed her mind. She said, "You've spent years being isolated by this, first by his control, then by your mother's disbelief, then by the legal process. You deserve to be in a room where people understand without you having to explain, where you're not the only one who knows what it's like." So Rachel went. She came home from her first session and didn't talk about it. Just went to her apartment, texted me that she was fine, and that was it. But she went back the next week, and the week after that. After about a month, she mentioned it during one of our Sunday dinners. She said, "There's a woman in my group who could be my twin. Different abuser, different situation, but the same pattern, the same isolation, the same feeling of not being believed. She tried to tell her father what her stepmother was doing, and he called her jealous, called her a liar, chose his new wife over his daughter." I felt sick. I said, "How old was she when it started?" Rachel said, 14. It went on for 6 years before she finally got out. I said, "Did her father ever believe her?" Rachel shook her head, said, "He died still believing she made it all up. She never got an apology, never got acknowledgement. She just had to accept that he would never choose her." We sat in silence for a while. Then Rachel said, "I'm lucky, Mom. You eventually believed me. You eventually chose me." A lot of people never get that. The word lucky felt wrong, but I knew what she meant. She continued. She said, "That group made me realize something. What happened to me isn't unique. It's not special. It's a pattern that plays out in thousands of families. Predators target vulnerable people. They groom families, not just victims. They build trust with everyone so that when the victim speaks up, they're the one who seems crazy. It's strategic, calculated, and it works because people don't want to believe someone they love could do something so horrible. I said, "You're right. I didn't want to believe it." Believing it meant admitting I had brought a monster into our home, that I had put you in danger, that I had been fooled. It was easier to believe you were mistaken than to face what that said about my judgment. Rachel looked at me, said, "I understand that now. I didn't before, but I do now. That's what the group helped me see, that your denial wasn't about not loving me. It was about protecting yourself from a truth too painful to accept." I said, "That doesn't make it okay." She said, "No, it doesn't, but it makes it human." That conversation shifted something between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding, the kind that only comes from years of hard work and harder conversations. Rachel started bringing things home from group, insights, strategies, ways of thinking about what happened that took some of the weight off. One day she said, "Dr. Morgan talks about post-traumatic growth. The idea that trauma doesn't just break you, it can also change you in ways that make you stronger, more resilient, more compassionate." I used to hate that idea. It felt like saying the abuse was worth it because I learned something. But I'm starting to understand it differently. The abuse was never worth it. It should never have happened. But I can acknowledge that I'm different now, that I understand things I wouldn't have understood otherwise, that I can help people I couldn't have helped before. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I'm thinking about becoming a victim advocate, working with people going through the legal system, helping them navigate what I had to navigate alone, being the person I needed and didn't have." My heart swelled. I said, "You would be amazing at that." She smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen in years. She said, "I think I would too." 6 months later, Rachel enrolled in a training program for victim advocates. She took classes at night while working her day job, studied legal procedures, trauma-informed communication, crisis intervention. She was exhausted, but energized, like she had finally found something that made sense of the senseless. I watched her transform, watched her take the worst thing that had ever happened to her and turn it into something that could help others. I've never been more proud. One evening she called me, said, "Mom, I need to tell you something. I've been asked to speak at a conference for professionals who work with abuse survivors. They want me to talk about my experience, about what helped and what didn't, about what advocates and family members should know." I said, "Are you going to do it?" She said, "I think so, but I'm terrified. What if I freeze? What if I can't get through it? What if people judge me?" I said, "They won't judge you. They'll listen, they'll learn, and you'll help people just by telling the truth. That's all you have to do. Tell your truth." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Will you come with me?" I said, "Of course. I'll be in the front row." The conference was in Seattle, a 3-hour drive from Portland. Rachel and I drove up together the day before, checked into a hotel, had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the water. She was nervous, kept checking her notes, rehearsing parts of her speech. I finally took her hands and said, "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be honest. That's all they need from you." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The next morning we arrived at the conference center. Hundreds of people, social workers, therapists, lawyers, advocates, all people who worked with trauma survivors every day. Rachel's session was in the afternoon. We sat in on other panels in the morning, listened to experts talk about trauma responses, best practices, systemic failures. It was overwhelming but important. When it was Rachel's turn, I took my seat in the front row, like I promised. The room filled up, standing room only. Rachel stood at the podium, looking small and scared and brave. She started speaking. Her voice shook at first, but then it steadied. She told her story. Not all of it, but enough. She talked about the years of grooming, the isolation, the fear, the moment she decided to gather evidence instead of waiting to be believed. She talked about the trial, the appeals, the ongoing healing. And then she said something that made me cry. She said, the hardest part wasn't the abuse itself. It was not being believed by the person whose belief mattered most. My mother dismissed my concerns for years. And that dismissal was almost more damaging than what my abuser did, because it taught me that my reality didn't matter, that my safety didn't matter, that protecting the family image mattered more than protecting me. People in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Some took notes, some wiped their eyes. Rachel continued. She said, "But my mother eventually did believe me, and that belief saved my life. Not just physically, emotionally, because it told me that I wasn't crazy, that what I experienced was real, that I mattered." If you work with survivors, please understand this. Belief is everything. It's the foundation of healing. Without it, nothing else works. She spoke for 30 minutes, answered questions for another 20. And when it was over, the room gave her a standing ovation. I watched my daughter, my brave, broken, beautiful daughter, standing in front of strangers and turning her pain into purpose. And I thought, she did this without me. She survived without me. She became this person in spite of me, not because of me. That hurt, but it was also true. After the conference, we drove home in comfortable silence. Finally, Rachel said, "Thank you for coming." I said, "Thank you for letting me." She said, "I meant what I said up there, about you not believing me being almost worse than the abuse itself. I need you to know that." I said, "I know, and I understand, and I will carry that for the rest of my life." She said, "I don't need you to carry it as punishment. I need you to carry it as a reminder, so it never happens again. Not with me, not with anyone." I said, "I promise." And I meant it. If you're still with me, if you've stayed through this whole painful story, I need to ask you something before I continue. Have you ever had to admit you were wrong about something big? Something that changed everything? Have you ever had to look at yourself and accept that you caused harm even though you never meant to? Tell me in the comments, because I need to know I'm not the only one who has had to do this hard work. And if this story is making you think, making you feel, making you question, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to hear how this ends, because we're almost there, and I promise you there's hope at the end of this. Not the fairy tale kind, the real kind, the kind that's earned through years of showing up and doing the work. Now let me finish this. 4 years after the trial, Michael came up for parole again. Rachel and I submitted statements again. This time, Rachel included information about her victim advocacy work, about the other survivors she had helped, about the healing she had done and the life she had built. The parole board denied him again. But this time, Rachel's reaction was different. She didn't just nod and move on. She said, "I don't need him to stay in prison for me to be okay. I'm okay either way. He can't hurt me anymore. Not really, because I've taken back everything he tried to take from me." That was the moment I knew she was going to be all right. Not perfect, not unmarked, but all right. Rachel and Stephanie got married in a small ceremony in Portland. Just close friends and family. I walked Rachel down the aisle. Sarah was there. We had slowly rebuilt some semblance of a relationship. It would never be what it was. But it was something. At the reception, Rachel gave a speech. She thanked Stephanie for loving her through the hard parts, for being patient, for understanding. And then she looked at me and said, "And thank you to my mom, for eventually choosing me, for doing the work even when it was hard, for showing me that it's never too late to change." I ugly cried through the whole thing because I didn't deserve that grace. But she gave it to me anyway. After the wedding, Rachel pulled me aside. She said, "I have something for you." She handed me a small box. Inside was a necklace, a silver pendant with 2 interlocking circles. She said, "One circle is you, one is me. We're connected. We're always going to be connected. But we're also separate, whole on our own. That's what I want for us. Connection without codependency. Love without losing ourselves. I put it on. Haven't taken it off since. 5 years after that night in April when Rachel woke me and showed me the truth, we went back to Eugene. Not to the house. That had been sold years ago. But to the city. To walk the streets. To reclaim the space. We had lunch at a cafe we used to go to. Walked through the park where I used to take her when she was little. Drove past her old high school. And we talked about the good memories. The ones that existed before Michael. The ones he couldn't take away. Rachel said, I think I'm ready to stop letting what he did define my entire history with this place. Eugene was my home long before he was ever in it. I want to remember it that way. I said, I think that's beautiful. She said, I think I'm ready to forgive you too, fully, not just understand, not just accept, but actually forgive. I stopped walking, looked at her, said, You don't have to do that for me. She said, I'm not doing it for you, I'm doing it for me. Because carrying that anger, that resentment, it's exhausting. And you've shown up, you've done the work, you've changed, you've earned it. I started crying, right there on the street. And Rachel hugged me, a real hug, the kind we hadn't shared in years. She said, I love you, Mom. I said, I love you too, more than anything. And I meant it, with everything I had. That night, sitting in a hotel room in Eugene, I pulled out a journal I had been keeping. My therapist suggested it years ago, a place to process everything. I wrote, Today, Rachel forgave me. I don't know if I've forgiven myself yet. Maybe I never will. Maybe that's okay. Maybe the work isn't about forgiveness. Maybe it's about commitment, committing to being better, to listening, to believing, to choosing the people I love over my own comfort. Rachel has built a beautiful life. Not despite what happened, not because of it, but alongside it. She carries her scars, but they don't carry her. And I get to be part of that life. Not because I deserve it, but because she's generous enough to let me. That's grace, real grace. And I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of it. I closed the journal, turned off the light, and slept better than I had in years. 6 years have passed since that night in April when Rachel opened the drawer and showed me a truth I should have seen long before. 6 years since my world shattered and reformed into something I barely recognized. 6 years of therapy and hard conversations and rebuilding trust one painful brick at a time. I am 83 years old now. My hair is completely white. My hands shake more than they used to. I move slower. Think slower sometimes. But in the ways that matter, I am sharper than I have ever been. More present. More awake. More willing to see uncomfortable truths instead of hiding from them. Rachel is 34 now. She runs a victim advocacy program in Portland. She speaks at conferences regularly. She has helped hundreds of survivors navigate the legal system, find resources, and most importantly, be believed. She has turned her pain into purpose in a way that takes my breath away. She and Stephanie bought a house last year, a small craftsman-style home with a garden in the back. They have 2 rescue dogs and a life full of friends and meaning and joy. Rachel still has hard days, still has nightmares sometimes, still carries the weight of what was done to her, but she has learned to carry it without letting it crush her. That is its own kind of miracle. I live alone in my small house in Portland. People ask if I get lonely, if I wish I had a companion. And I tell them the truth. I had a companion once, and he was a monster I brought into my daughter's life. I will not risk that again. Not because I am punishing myself, but because I have finally learned what matters. And what matters is being available, being trustworthy, being the person Rachel can count on without question or hesitation. I see Rachel every week, sometimes more. We have dinner, we go to movies, we take walks along the river, we talk about everything and nothing. The relationship we have now is nothing like the relationship we had before. That one was built on my denial and her fear. This one is built on honesty and accountability and a love that has been tested by fire and survived. Last month, Rachel called me with news. She said, "Mom, I need to tell you something. Stephanie and I are talking about having a baby. We are looking into adoption." My heart stopped, then started again faster. I said, "That is wonderful. You will be an amazing mother." There was a pause. Then Rachel said, "I am terrified. What if I mess up? What if I do not see something I should see? What if I fail them the way I was failed?" I understood that fear. I lived with it every single day. I said, "You will mess up. Every parent does. But you will also show up. You will listen. You will believe them when they tell you something is wrong. You will choose them over your own comfort. That is what matters. Not perfection. Presence." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Will you help me when the time comes? Will you be there?" I said, "Every single day, for the rest of my life, whatever you need." She said, "Thank you." And I thought about the gift she was giving me, the chance to be a grandmother again. Not the grandmother I was before, the one who missed everything, but a new kind, one who has learned from devastating mistakes, one who knows what is at stake. I will not take that gift lightly. A few weeks ago, I got a phone call I was not expecting. It was from Sarah, my other daughter, the one I have a polite but distant relationship with, the one who did not believe Rachel at first, the one who chose her own comfort over her sister's truth. She said, "Mom, I need to talk to you about something." I braced myself, said, "What is it?" She said, "I have been going to therapy for the past year, working through a lot of things, and my therapist helped me see that I failed Rachel too. I failed her by not believing her, by making it about my discomfort instead of her safety, by prioritizing my relationship with you over my relationship with her, and I need to make that right." I said, "You need to talk to Rachel, not me." She said, "I know, I have been. We have been having conversations, slow ones, painful ones, but she is giving me a chance, and I do not want to waste it." I said, "Good, do not waste it." There was a pause. Then Sarah said, "I also need to say something to you. I am angry with you, Mom. I am angry that you brought Michael into our lives, that you did not see what he was, that you chose him over Rachel for so long. And I know you have done the work. I know you have changed. But I am still angry, and I need you to know that." Her words stung, but they were fair. I said, "You have every right to be angry. I failed both of you. Not in the same way, but I failed you both." She said, "I am working on forgiving you, but I am not there yet." I said, "Take all the time you need. I will be here." We talk more now, Sarah and I. Still not often, but more than before. And she and Rachel are slowly rebuilding something. I do not know what it will look like in the end, but I am grateful they are trying. Michael was released from prison 4 months ago. He served 6 years of his 8-year sentence, got out early for good behavior. The parole board notified us, asked if we wanted to make statements. Rachel said no, said she had said everything she needed to say, said his release did not change anything for her. I asked if she was scared. She said no. He has no power over me anymore. He is just a sad old man who destroyed his life. I have built mine. He cannot touch that. I wish I had her peace, because when I got the notification that he was out, I felt terror. Not for myself, for her. What if he tried to contact her? What if he showed up at her house? What if he tried to hurt her? But Rachel reminded me of something important. She said, "Mom, I survived him when no one believed me. I survived him when I was alone and scared and had no resources. I am not that person anymore. I have a community. I have legal protections. I have knowledge. I have strength. He cannot hurt me now." She was right. But I still check on her more often than I probably should. Still text to make sure she is okay. Still worry in the way mothers worry. Rachel is patient with my worry. She understands it even when it annoys her. That is grace. I ran into someone from the old neighborhood last week, a woman I used to know from church. She recognized me at the grocery store, came up and said, "Barbara, is that you? I heard about what happened with Michael. I just cannot believe it. He always seemed like such a nice man." I looked at her. This woman who probably meant well, but whose words carried the implication that maybe it was not true. Maybe it was exaggerated. Maybe Michael was not really that bad. And I said something I would not have said 6 years ago. I said, he was not a nice man. He was a predator. And if you cannot believe that, then you do not understand how predators work. They seem nice. That is how they get access. That is how they get away with it for years. She looked uncomfortable, said, "Well, I am sure it was very difficult for everyone." I said, "It was difficult for Rachel. She is the victim, not everyone. Her." The woman made an excuse and walked away. I used to care what people like that thought. Used to worry about my reputation, about what the neighbors would say, about keeping up appearances. I do not care anymore. They matter more than everything. And if you have already failed them, if you have already chosen wrong, it is not too late. It is never too late to start choosing them now, to start believing them now, to start doing the work now. Rachel gave me that chance, and it changed both of our lives. You can give that chance to the children in your life too. You can be the person who breaks the cycle, who believes when others do not, who stands up when it would be easier to stay silent, who chooses truth over comfort. That is the lesson. That is what I want you to take from this story. Not that I am a hero. I am not. I am a woman who failed spectacularly and then spent years trying to make it right. But that failure does not have to be the end. It can be the beginning of something better, something true, something worth having. So please, if there is a child in your life who is trying to tell you something, listen, believe them, choose them. Do not wait until they have to break into locked drawers and gather evidence and live in terror for years before you take them seriously. Believe them now, today, this moment, because that belief might save their life, and it will definitely save your relationship with them. That is what I have learned. That is what I want to pass on. That is the truth that cost me everything to understand, but was worth every painful step. Believe the children, choose the children, protect the children, always, no matter what, no exceptions. If you are still here, if you made it all the way to the end of this long, painful story, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being willing to sit with uncomfortable truths. Please leave a comment telling me where you are from. Tell me if this story meant something to you. Tell me if it made you think about your own life. And please, if you really heard me, leave the word believe in the comments. That word is everything. It is what Rachel needed. It is what every victim needs. It is what changes everything. Hit that like button if this story touched you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. There is a new one every single day. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe a parent who is missing signs. Maybe a survivor who needs to know they are not alone. Maybe someone who is trying to rebuild trust after failing someone they love. This story is for all of you. Take care of each other out there. Protect the children in your life. Listen to them. Believe them. Choose them. That is how we break these cycles. That is how we create safety. That is how we love the way love is supposed to look. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for letting this old grandmother share the hardest story of her life. I hope it helps someone. I hope it changes something. I hope it reminds you that it is never too late to do the right thing. From my heart to yours, take care. And remember, believe the children. Always believe the children.